It's been another record-breaking day in the English Channel. GB News can confirm that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year so far, after more than 100 others crossed in 2 small boats today. 98 migrants were found packed into one small dinghy last weekend, the biggest number ever to attempt to cross the Channel in a single boat. And it comes just a day after the Prime Minister celebrated the arrest of a major supplier of small boats, boasting that it proved his smash the gangs policy was working. OK, what do you think about that? Let's get the thoughts of my panel. I'm joined by political consultant Suzanne Evans, podcast host and political commentator Will Kingston, and journalist and political commentator JJ Anisobi. Welcome back to my esteemed panel. Smash the gangs, Suzanne. He took a victory lap yesterday for busting one guy in Amsterdam. Is that going to do the job?
No, he's not smashing the gangs, is he? It seems to me that by continuing with the policy of picking up migrants when they're halfway across the Channel and bringing them into Britain, he's actually facilitating the gangs. What else can you say about it, really? You know,
are you suggesting Keir Starmer as a people smuggler?
Well, he's kind of extending the trade. I mean, you know, why don't we send them back to France? Why is France being allowed to send them here in the first place? How many millions of pounds are we spending supposedly to tell France to stop them coming over here? The French police just stand on it. We've seen it on GB News reports. Yeah. You know, the French police just stand on the beaches and let them go. Well, and then halfway across, the RNLI or government ships just pick them up and bring them here. If that's not an extension of the gangs, I don't know what is.
JJ, what did you make of that interview with Gavin Williamson then, where he said, I said to him, look, you were Defence Secretary in 2019, you were head of the Armed Forces, or at least the Defence Secretary. Why didn't you just do what Australia did and intercept the boats, turn them back in the water? He said that the problem wasn't as bad in 2019, which, I mean, I don't think is entirely accurate, let's just say
It's not accurate, and Gavin Williamson is an MP who has failed upwards. I could talk to you for hours about his many failures and why he's had to resign from several positions, but that's another show. What I do think is that no British government has the gumption to do that. I think the British public, lots of the British public would like to see those boats turned around in sea and dragged back to French shores, but I don't think any British Prime Minister is going to do it because they're too scared of how people are going to react to it.
Gumption is the right word. I was living in Australia when Australia sorted this problem out in the early 2010s, and we had the same issue. We had a weak Labor government at the time that let the boats in under the name of, you know, morality, under the name of being kind and caring, and as a result of that so-called kind and caring policies, hundreds and thousands of people died in rickety boats. Yeah. It just requires, it's not a difficult problem to solve if you have the political will to solve it.
Was it Abbott?
It was Tony Abbott.
So he won election on stopping the boats, didn't he?
That was literally the slogan, stop the boats, and it required offshore processing and literally turning the boats back.
What was the mood like in Australia amongst the general public to that message, stopping the boats? What was the response?
It was initially, this was the mastery of political messaging. Initially, they were made to sound uncaring and cruel, but then the Liberal Party were very smart in how they said, look, the cruel and uncaring thing is if you create an incentive for people to go on unsafe, rickety boats and human smugglers to take you there, ultimately to your death in many instances. The kind and caring thing is to create a deterrent. And that's what the right in this country needs to understand. The right needs to say, we actually own the right moral side of this argument. An effective deterrent may look cruel in the short term, but it will lead to lives being saved in the long term.
Yeah, and my understanding is, so that boat that came across the Channel with 98 people...
Unbelievable.
I mean, they were mostly men, as they always are, but my understanding is what they do is they shove the women and children in the middle, and actually that's the most dangerous place in the boat to be, because if you're in that rubber dinghy...
Yeah. And then you're essentially crushed amongst the...
Yeah, so Will's absolutely right. The moral thing to do is to stop the boats, because only then are we going to stop people dying in the Channel.
I gather from people I've spoken to today who work in this enforcement that because of... I know Keir Starmer's only arrested one Turkish man who apparently is a big kingpin figure, but apparently the smuggling gangs are now getting so rude that their business is going to stop. They're trying to get as many people as quickly as possible across, which so now they're going to start overfilling these boats just to try and maximise the profit they can make from this.
That's an interesting point. Very interesting. Suzanne, who benefits from the small boats crisis?
Well, I suppose the hotels that are being turned into migrant hotels, and they're making more money, I understand, from taking these migrants in than they would by operating as a normal hotel. There are the government outsourcers that are actually doing the contracts for these hotels. They must be making, well, they are making millions. We know they're making millions. I think there's the whole migrant industry that's built up around asylum seekers, the kind of left-wing pro-immigration people. They're probably getting money as a consequence of pushing
it's
this agenda as well. I suspect lots of people are benefiting from this.
Multi-billion-pound trade. How about, Will, smash the gangs, but not the so-called people smuggling gangs who are just going to be playing a game of whack-a-mole with the authorities? How about smash the gangs of NGOs and do-gooders who are facilitating this? My family are partially Greek. They live in Greece. During the peak years there of the migration crisis, the NGOs were picking these migrants up in the middle of the water, they do it in the Mediterranean as well, and doing what the RNLI do. RNLI?
That's right, yeah.
Sorry, it's been a long day. And pick them up in the water, as they do in the Med as well in Italy. Do we need to smash the gangs to the focus on these NGOs and these do-gooders?
Do all of it, right? I think the policy should be consistent whether or not it's an NGO bringing them across or whether or not it's a people smuggler. The rules should be in place for everyone. And as I said, there are very simple things you can do to stop this. Really simple things.
Go on,
you can do. Offshore processing and turn back the boats.
So people would argue, they'd say where? We've got no offshore processing sites.
I've said this myself as well about the offshore processing in France and Libya and Tunisia.
But France wouldn't allow it. That's what they'd say.
I don't think. I think as long as we are paying them millions of pounds, they should allow us to have a small processing centre. Of course they will. If we say we're not going to pay you any more money, they will start doing what we tell them.
It's exactly as Will said. If we have the political will, this could happen. Stick a great big cruise liner in the middle of the channel. Process them there.
Yeah.
You know, there's all sorts of things you could do. It's just that the government will not act.
The French don't want this trade either, right? Because they're going through French territory. If you create a disincentive to get to the UK, less people will be wanting to go through France as well. I refuse to believe that this is not something that the French and UK governments can't actually sort out with the will to do so.
JJ, do you think this problem has got worse under Labour?
People are going to say yes.
Yeah.
Labour have been in power for 4 months. The majority of these record numbers we've had this year, the majority of which came under the last government. This is not a Labour problem. The backlog we have is because of the last government. The last government refused to process people, so now we have a huge backlog and we have to keep these hotels open because we're going to put these people. So I don't think it's gotten worse under Labour. I think Labour have now actually tried to find a solution to it, but it's not going to happen overnight.
But why do we have to pay £8 million a day to put them in hotels? Why can't we have big detention centres?
Well, that's still going to cost money, isn't it?
Well, it's going to be a damn sight cheaper than hotels.
You've got to build them. Where are you going to build them?
They get free dental care, they get access to NHS health.
They're going to need,
they get food, they get internet, they get Wi-Fi,
of course.
they get bus passes, they get Aspen cards with money loaded onto it.
What would you rather, that they would just let these people starve? They're not allowed to work. I think anyone who's here seeking asylum should be given a processed and given a card so they can work, and they can contribute to the society.
Sorry, that's, you've got to have British jobs with British people first, I'm afraid.
We have jobs with British people, but British people don't want to do those jobs.
In small boats alone, not to mention other routes of asylum, that's 33,000 people who are potentially taking jobs.
They should be in detention.
Why don't British people want to go and do the jobs of picking fruits?
Well, hang on, let me ask you then, JJ.
That's a complete myth.
This is a separate issue to legal immigration. Illegal immigration is not a way that you plug gaps in your workforce.
JJ, let me ask you, which jobs would you give to illegal migrants, asylum seekers who are waiting for their applications to be...
Whatever job they were able to do.
Or going and work in a nursery?
Well, if these people, if they can speak English and they've been properly vetted and checked, then yes, I think they should.
But how, JJ? They throw their passports into the channel.
Well, then they can.
I'm saying you vet them when you don't know who they are.
Well, then you can't vet them. So in that case, those people can't be. But there are asylum seekers coming here who aren't throwing their passports away. There are asylum seekers coming here who we can trace and we can vet. And if they fill the qualifications, I think they should be able to do the jobs.
But if you're doing this, you're giving people an incentive to keep coming.
They are going to be, if they're going to be here, stuck here anyway for 4 years whilst they get processed, they may as well contribute to our economy. But that's what I think. And once they are processed, if it's it's a no, then they are sent back. That is it. But at the moment, we are letting them stay in the hotels. And as people are complaining, they're being given dental, they're being given NHS healthcare, they're being given free meals. So. Because we would say to them, whilst you're being processed, you must work in order to get your £50 a week, whatever it is.
Work.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely, and I think that is a fair trade-off. The British people cannot complain if we're saying to the asylum seekers, whilst you're waiting, you will contribute to our society.
British people will complain when their kids can't get jobs because it's been taken by a migrant, possibly on less than a minimum wage. If you're saying they've got to earn 50 quid or whatever, I I don't know how much they're paid, but you just can't have that, I'm afraid. I have every sympathy for genuine asylum seekers. I really do. And what angers me most about this whole thing is that I just know in my bones that genuine asylum seekers are being turned away and they're not allowed to come here because we can't cope because of the massive illegal ones that are here. Migrant columns are usually genuine refugees are normally women and children. That's not what we're seeing now.
And 90% of 90% of asylum-seeking refugees normally stay within the country that is nearest to theirs.
Exactly
Most of them don't travel this far.
Yeah.
These are not asylum seekers.
Will,
99% of them are
to
criminals.
If they're going through France, by definition, they're not asylum seekers, they're economic migrants. We need to actually find people with the political will to solve this problem or it's going to get worse.
Okie dokie, great debate. Thank you, panel. Now, the senior Tory MP, Sir Gavin Williamson, has hit out at the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, after he was informed yesterday that a migrant hotel will be reopening in his constituency. That's despite Williamson successfully campaigning to have it shut down. So the Roman Way Hotel in Cannock, Staffordshire, will be used from today to house asylum seekers, with the Home Office blaming the decision on, quote, challenges across the system. So Keir Starmer promised to end the use of migrant hotels last year, of course, arguing that they wouldn't be needed because a Labour government would clear the asylum backlog. But just last month, reports suggested that the Home Office were considering opening more migrant hotels as they struggle to cope with an influx of channel crossings. So much for Smash the Gangs, I guess. I'm delighted to be joined now by the Tory MP himself, Sir Gavin Williamson. Gavin, good evening. Thank you for joining me. First of all, do you feel a bit betrayed, I guess, by the Labour government? They said they weren't going to reopen this hotel, and yet you're now dealing with this mess in your constituency.
Yeah, they were very clear they weren't going to be opening hotels. I think a lot of people voted for them, taking them at face value, and it's just not been the case. And I think what we're seeing, we've got a problem in my constituency, but I think this has been replicated in towns up and down the land, but the true scale of it hasn't yet come out, because we've seen the numbers. I mean, since the issue of the idea of having a deterrent there to deter people to come into this country has been scrapped, oddly enough, we've got loads more people crossing the channel, coming into this country. It's a bigger problem than it was before. And I think the true scale of the number of hotels that have secretly been opened hasn't yet been exposed.
Yep, indeed. I visited one today. Hopefully we can show you the footage of that on Monday's show, but I visited one today that had been opened in the last few days. The locals weren't consulted, they weren't even told about it, and they're very, very cross. Gavin, just practically, can you just explain for viewers who may not appreciate why this is a problem? Why are migrant hotels a problem for communities? What exactly are locals upset about?
Well, they're concerned about it, the fact that it's a hotel that's not being used for tourism, for business, an important economic earner for the local area. That's been taken out of the local community. Also, this isn't actually just bad for the communities, it's also bad for the migrants that have been placed in these hotels with no support. So it's often left to the local councils, local voluntary groups, actually to clothe them, support these migrants. And actually, it's bad for the migrants, and it's bad for the it's bad for the local communities. And as I say, these are important economic earners for the sort of towns and communities that they're near. And there's no economic benefit when it's full of migrants.
OK, well, look, Gavin, some would say we shouldn't need the hotels in the first place because they shouldn't be here and the boats should have been stopped. You indeed were the Defence Secretary in 2019. Why didn't you, for example, just deploy the Navy to stop migrant crossings in their tracks?
Well, in 2019, the issue of sort of the large-scale crossings of channel just wasn't there. But what you do need to have is you need to have a system. If they land in this country, they're processed quickly and they're returned either to a third country, such as Rwanda, or they're returned back home. And, you know, Labour had promised everyone that they weren't going to be opening these hotels.
No, but hang on, we're talking about the time you're in government, Gavin. Why can we take a book from Australia's, at least from Australia's book, and just turn them back? You were head of the Navy. You could have done that, no?
Yeah. Well, when I was sort of Defence Secretary, we didn't have that same issue in terms of channel crossings. They had nowhere near that sort of level or scale. But what you do need to do is you need to be able to have a process where they're sort of returned very swiftly and very quickly. And that's what you've seen in so many other countries. You've seen the Rwanda scheme was very much based on a similar scheme as to what occurred in Australia in terms of people being moved to a third country. And actually, when they realise that deterrence is there, they don't run the risk. Let's face it, we're already starting to see it happen with people not actually staying in Britain, but going to Ireland. And you would see the number of people looking to make that dangerous crossing reduce dramatically. So you had a real solution to a real problem.
Yeah, but flights, of course, hadn't got off the ground just at the point that the Rishi Sunak had called the election. Why he did call the election in the wake of all your great economic figures at the start of the year, I still don't know. But look, talking about legal migration, Gavin, the numbers hit 685,000 net last year. That was more than 3 times higher than at the time of the last election when the Tories promised in their manifesto in 2019 to cut those numbers. Many of our viewers blame you and your party for the rapid societal disintegration linked to migration under your government. Would you like to apologise on behalf of the Conservatives for their migration record?
So, Ben, I've always been very clear of the view that we need to be getting migration into this country down to tens of thousands. That was something that I was first elected on. You have, but it's actually the right policy and it's the right approach.
So why didn't you do it then, Gavin? With respect, viewers will be watching this now and saying, look, you were in power for 14 years. Why didn't you do it?
Yeah, and that was a policy decision that was made by Boris Johnson. But what you need to be doing is you saw the changes that Rishi Sunak was making at the tail end of that government that was actually going to have a real downward pressure in terms of the migration that was coming into this country through legal routes. And we do need to be getting it down to tens of thousands.
So would you like to apologise? Because Priti Patel on this channel a few months ago with Chopper, Christopher Hope, she didn't think there was a problem with it. So would you, I believe you don't believe there was no problem with that?
Well, I personally, as I touched upon, I think we should have had the target down at tens of thousands. I think that's the approach that we should have had all the way through, not just from the 2010s, but all the way through to 2024. That's my personal view. I think a lot of your viewers would probably agree with that approach. But you don't always totally agree with everything that your party necessarily says and does. That's kind of a democratic process, though.
Got it. OK, very briefly, because we're short of time, you were, of course, Education Secretary as well. What do you make of coppers visiting classrooms to give telling-offs to 9-year-old kids?
I actually think we want to see police officers in school talking to children about the role that they have in the community, about how the police are there to protect us. And I think we should never forget that the key role is there for parents to enforce good behaviour, good discipline as well. And that's there to support teachers and also to support the police.
But police officers arriving because somebody said that a classmate smelled like fish? I mean, absurd, no?
Absolutely absurd. I hadn't actually seen the story, but, you think the police will probably have better things to do with their time. But you do want to see police officers going into schools, talking to children, making sure that they understand that they're there to support the community.
Thank you, Sir Gavin, for your time. Really appreciate it. We'll catch up soon. Thank you. A Home Office spokesperson said tonight this government inherited an asylum system under unprecedented strain, with thousands stuck in a backlog without their claims processed. We've taken immediate action to restart asylum processing and are delivering a major uplift in returns to remove people with no right to be in the UK. Over the long term, this will reduce costs of accommodation. We remain absolutely committed to ending the use of hotels for asylum seekers and continue to identify a range of accommodation options to minimise their use.